Disney's Bronze Age was a time period between 1970 and 1988. It was the time period just after Walt Disney had died. With Walt gone, so was their lead storyteller. And even though Walt hadn't been involved in animation for many years due to other exciting ventures like the movies, television and theme parks, he was still the leader who greenlit every animated film. Walt always gave the Disney spark to each film. Jungle Book, for example, was a very dark book, but Walt simplified the story to focus on Baloo and Mowgli and make it an upbeat adventure. This period is also known by fans as the Dark Age of Disney, which is a light way to say that Disney hit a slump during this period of time. Walt Disney's son-in-law, Ron Miller, was put in charge of the Disney company with very little experience in running a movie business. He was an American football player who fell in love with Walt's daughter. Walt was keen to have him in the Disney company and he climbed through the ranks. The end of this period sees Ron Miller fired and an invasion of Hollywood. Michael Eisner and Frank Wells are brought in to lead the company. These two are tasked to bring Disney back to the glory days. This is a marathon episode showing each of my 100 fact videos of the films from the Bronze Age. I will put time codes in if you want to skip to a certain film. If you enjoy content like this, please like and subscribe. The Aristocats is the 20th animated feature film by Disney. It was released on December 24th, 1970. Back in 1962, Walt Disney was looking to make more content for television. Walt Disney had become very successful in his other outings like television and theme parks. Disney had an anthology series called The Wonderful World of Disney. The series was broadcasted weekly and had a mixture of cartoons, live action and a segment hosted by Walt Disney himself, talking about upcoming projects in the films or theme parks. As a side note, is there any chance we could get the World of Disney series on Disney+? I would love to watch it all. I love finding old footage of Walt Disney talking about all the films. Walt Disney was on the look for an original script for a 2-part live action episode for the World of Disney. This was how the script was started for the Aristocats. Can you imagine a live action version of Aristocats, similar to how they made Homeward Bound? I mean, I'm showing my age there because probably any of the young viewers here don't know what Homeward Bound is, but I mean that was something. It was developed by Tom McGowan and Tom Rowe. Following 2 years of rewrites, Walt Disney suggested the project would be better suited for an animated film. Woolie Reitherman, one of Disney's famous 9 Old Men, was the director for The Sword in the Stone and The Jungle Book. Woolie liked the idea of the Aristocats and suggested it as a follow-up to The Jungle Book. In 1966, Walt Disney assigned Ken Anderson to work on the project to see if it would work as an animated film. Ken Anderson was a legendary art director at Disney and he worked at the company for over 40 years. Ken Anderson spent 18 months developing the design of the characters. Walt Disney saw the preliminary sketches and approved the project shortly before his death. After The Jungle Book was completed, the animation department began work on the Aristocats. Like The Jungle Book, the characters were patterned on the personalities of the voice actors. In 1966, Walt Disney himself contacted Phil Harris to improvise the script, and shortly after, he was cast to voice Thomas O'Malley. Louis Armstrong, the voice of King Louie, was initially going to voice Scat Cat, but he backed out of the project due to illness. 5 of Disney's legendary 9 Old Men worked on the film. They were Frank Thomas, Ollie Johnston, Milt Kahl, John Lounsbury and Eric Larson. Frank Thomas animated the romantic scene between Thomas O'Malley and the Duchess. Frank had previous experience animating romantic scenes. He animated maybe the most famous romantic scene of all time when he produced the animation for the spaghetti scene in Lady and the Tramp. Frank attempts to top that scene with this piece of animation. In my opinion, it still doesn't top the Lady and the Tramp scene, but it has all the features of a Frank Thomas scene. He has an incredible ability to create these emotions from pencil drawings. Ollie Johnston developed some of the principal characters for this film. Ollie Johnston was a dog owner for most of his life, and he studied the animals in his own home for productions like Lady and the Tramp and 101 Dalmatians. But when he started to work on the Duchess and her 3 kittens, it turned out that he had a great understanding of cats too. He based the kittens, Marie, Toulouse and Berlioz, on real children. This is obvious in scenes where the 2 brothers gang up on Marie. The kittens also enjoy blaming each other whenever something goes wrong. John Lounsbury would animate scenes of the butler Edgar and the lawyer George. He creates some brilliant moments with various gags between the 2 characters. Eric Larson had the chance to work on Roquefort, a mouse who is somehow friends with the cats. Eric animates a great scene where the mouse and the cats share a meal. The mouse brings huge crackers to dip into the milk. Unfortunately, this is the milk that has been spiked with sleeping ingredients by Edgar. Side note, Edgar has to be the most useless Disney villain of all time. His only goal is to get rid of 4 cats, and he fails miserably at it. It was during the production of Aristocats that the studio started to realise that all of their supervising animators were reaching retirement age. Eric Larson decided to become the new teacher to guarantee the future of Disney animation. He went on to train many of the great new artists responsible for the Renaissance era. Milt Kahl concentrated on the human characters in Aristocats. He was one of the few people with the draftsmanship to animate realistic humans. He animated Madame Bonfamille with elegance, George with charm, and Edgar the Butler with comic villainy. What is outstanding is that in these scenes he didn't use any live action reference. By this point, Milt believed that if you was a top animator, that you didn't need to use reference, as you should know how humans and animals move. Milt Kahl was truly one of a kind. The Aristocats was the last Disney animated feature film Robert and Richard Sherman worked on as staff songwriters, growing frustrated by the management of the studio following Walt Disney's death. Desiring to capture the essence of France, the Sherman brothers composed the song The Aristocats.
And the title song, of course, we kept saying, it's too bad Chevalier retired. He'd be perfect for this. He's Mr. Paris, but he had gone into retirement.
Well, Willie Reitherman, the director of the film, said, look, Dick, make a demo, the way you imitate him, make a demo of the song, and we'll get it to him.
And see, maybe he'll come out of retirement to do it. So I girded my loins, and again, I did my Chevalier imitation. Which pet's address is the finest in Paris? Which pets possess the longest pedigree? To which pets do the others tip their hats? Naturally, the Aristocats. Well, I did the whole song like that, and we sent it off to Chevalier. And happily, he came out of retirement, and the very last professional work he ever did, the last recording, was the soundtrack to our wonderful picture.
The Aristocats was originally released to theatres on December 24, 1970. By the end of its initial theatrical run, it had earned a total of $28 million. The film was very popular in England, France and Germany. It was re-released in theatres in 1980 and 1987. Marie, Walk in Paris is a Japanese animated music video starring Marie from the Aristocats. I have only just discovered this through doing the research for this video. The video was posted on Disney's Japanese YouTube channel in 2014. The video combines 2D imagery for the background and human characters, while Marie is completely 3D animated. There were plans in 2000 for Aristocats the animated series. The show was created to reinvent the characters Marie, Toulouse and Berlioz and turn them into teenagers. In 2005, Disney Toon Studios originally planned to make a follow-up film. The story was meant to centre around Marie, Duchess's daughter, who becomes smitten with another kitten aboard a luxury cruise ship. When John Lasseter was named the Chief Creative Officer, he called off all future straight-to-DVD sequels, which I'm still glad about, because some of them are really bad. I'm looking at you, Pocahontas 2. Shambles. Shambles! The Aristocats have been meetable characters in Disneyland, although they're not seen as frequently as the other more popular characters. Marie is still very popular on merchandise and can be seen on many items in the Disney parks. Robin Hood is the 21st Disney animated feature film. It was released on November the 8th, 1973, and was received positively by film critics. The idea to adapt Robin Hood into an animated feature film dated back to Walt Disney's interest in the tale of Reynard the Fox. He developed an interest during his first full-length feature production, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The idea was shelved over and over again until writer and production designer Ken Anderson incorporated ideas into a pitch for The Legend of Robin Hood. Ken Anderson thought it would be interesting to use anthropomorphic animals rather than people. Anthropomorphic is the attribution of human traits, emotions or intentions to non-human entities, in this case animals. Woolie Reitherman directed this film. Woolie was one of Disney's 9 old men, a group of core animators in the early days of Disney. After Walt's death, Woolie led the team and tried to motivate the crew as much as Walt did. He wanted to keep Disney animation alive, and if it wasn't for Woolie, Disney animation may have died with Walt Disney.
There was no replacement for Walt, and in my view, the main thing was to keep this team together and keep the same creative juices flowing that they had with Walt. And I always had little meetings so that those animators who were the key to producing any picture, so that those guys were in on the decisions. And it wasn't a fearless leader type of thing by any means, and you got an awful lot of good input.
Woolley decided to cast the henchmen in the film as rhinos, as they were menacing and quickly conveyed that they were strong and villainous.
We needed these powerful tank-like creatures that would just form a phalange and just rip through everything. And that was just a one-dimensional beast in a way. Of course, we put clothes on them, gave them spears.
Originally, Friar Tuck was to be a pig, but this was changed to be a badger to avoid insulting religious groups. The Sheriff of Nottingham was originally a goat, but was changed to a wolf, as they seemed to better represent the villains. Woolley Reitman also decided that the main villain should be a lion, and this has a double meaning. Lions represent royalty, which suited the character of Prince John. Lions also represent strong, powerful animals, and Prince John is the complete opposite of that.
Well, that's a different reason for using a lion. It was a cowardly lion, and the lion is a symbol of regal, of king, and of course he wasn't a king, and he was a scroungy lion and a sneaky lion, and it gave you a real good character. And then of course with Peter Ustinov's voice you couldn't miss.
Taxes! Taxes! Beautiful, lovely taxes!
This was the first Walt Disney animation film to not feature any humans since Bambi in 1942. Unlike Bambi, these animals act more like humans than they do animals. Veteran writer Larry Clemens came on board by writing the script. This script was then turned into the storyboards. Whilst Ken Anderson provided many sketches for the characters, it was Milt Kahl that polished and finalised them, ready for animation. Milt Kahl's design is very different to previous versions of Fox's at Disney. Milt's design is much more appealing and requires more subtle animation. This showed the improvement of Disney animators over the decades, because the acting became more realistic with emphasis on detail. Milt would often sketch out ideas before committing to any animation. He would explore all possibilities for the scene first, and think about which scene had the most potential to show the personality of the characters.
Let's take the Sheriff of Nottingham in Robin Hood. He's a big pompous oaf who is very satisfied with himself and very good, feels real good about everything, and especially about himself, so he has a real bouncy way of walking.
As the taxes too, and the taxes is due.
You see these things on people and you file them away in your mind somewhere.
Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston were two of the finest animators at Disney Animation. The two animators were best friends in real life and would go on to write The Illusion of Life, which became the Bible for animators. Frank and Ollie would both use their children as inspiration when animating scenes.
One of the most important parts of animation is observing, seeing things around you, see what people do and learn the little traits that they have, the way they look, the timing on them. You have to observe all those things.
Yeah, my son, I kept watching him when he was a kid, sucking his thumb and holding on to his ear while he did it, and I used that on Prince John.
Mother always did like Richard best.
Which ear did he hold?
I can't remember. My son would go from ear to ear this way. Prince John's arms weren't long enough to reach around and do that.
Yeah, one of my boys
yeah.
had a way when he was sleeping and he was nervous, he'd rub his feet together this way, as if there's some tension in there. And I used that on Prince John while Robin Hood was stealing the gold.
Ollie Johnston was given scenes to animate with Prince John and Sir Hiss. He created a brilliant relationship between the characters that relied on Prince John needing constant reassurance that he is a good monarch.
Another hiss out of you, hiss, and you are walking to Nottingham.
One more hiss out of you. Hiss. And you are walking to Nottingham.
John Lounsbury animated scenes with the Sheriff of Nottingham. I absolutely love John's work, especially on the scene where the sheriff is collecting money. He is interrogating Otto and collects the money from inside Otto's cast. Now, there is a misconception with the reused animation in this film. I have seen a lot of coverage about this topic on YouTube. There was a reason for the recycling of animation. Many people think it is to do with saving money. Technically, it would cost the same amount of money as it takes just as much time to copy the animation with new character designs than to create a new scene. The real reason it was done was that Woolly Riverman was proud of his animation knowledge and wanted to put it to good use. Remember, these films were only released in cinemas, so there would be no way for viewers to know it was reused. It was only with the release of VHS that people started to notice after numerous rewatches and comparisons.
Woolly was famous for reusing footage. He would reuse anything. In fact, everybody was aghast when he wound up using Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in the dance sequence in Robin Hood. And it was like, oh my God, you wouldn't.
It's not done extensively in this, but Woolly was very proud of his knowledge of old Disney animation and how it might apply within the context of a new production.
The most noticeable moment is during the Phony King of England segment. It heavily uses animation from previous films. Maid Marian's dance moves are copied from both Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Duchess from the Aristocats. The animals playing various instruments are lifted from the Aristocats. Also, the dance between Little John and Lady Cluck is lifted from the dance between Baloo and King Louie in The Jungle Book. Floyd Norman, a former Disney legendary animator, revealed that in reality it's harder and takes longer to redraw an existing sequence. During its initial release, Robin Hood earned $9.6 million in rentals in the United States and Canada. It also grossed $18 million in foreign territories, which at the time was a Disney record, with a worldwide rental of $27.5 million. Disney animator and director Byron Howard admitted that Robin Hood was his favourite film while growing up and cited it as a major influence on Zootopia, another Disney film with anthropomorphic characters. Robin Hood, Little John, Friar Tuck, Prince John and the Sheriff of Nottingham have all appeared in the Disney parks. However, they are quite rare to see. Here is an incredible old clip that I found from a training video for the Disneyland characters. It is so 90s that it is perfect.
The Disneyland Walt Disney World Entertainment Division presents this character training tape so that you who are portraying the characters of Robin Hood, Little John, or Prince John will better understand the problems you might encounter. It's also our purpose to acquaint you with the personality of the character. It's best to avoid smaller aisles, particularly those areas where fragile or breakable items are on display. All of the costume heads will impair your vision, and a quick turn or slip could cause an accident.
There are still no rides or attractions dedicated to Robin Hood, even though it has a cult following of fans. A live-action remake has been announced by Disney. Cary Grandland, who wrote the Lady and the Tramp remake, is scripting the film. It is believed to keep the anthropomorphic characters, which is going to look strange in live action. The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh is the 22nd Disney animated feature film. It was released on March 11th, 1977. When Walt Disney's children were younger, his wife Lillian would read them bedtime stories. They loved listening to the Mary Poppins stories, which led Walt to become fascinated with owning the film rights to the books. But that's a story for another time. One night, Walt Disney could hear endless laughter coming from his daughter's rooms. So Walt went to investigate. He found out that the laughter was because of a British book written by A.A. Milne. The book was Winnie the Pooh, and Walt fell in love with the stories. He thought they would be perfect for a Disney animated feature and looked into acquiring the rights. Walt managed to buy the rights for Winnie the Pooh in 1961. He assigned veteran Disney animator Woolly Riverman to the project. If you watched my last few videos, then you know that Woolly directed Jungle Book, Sword in the Stone, Aristocats and Robin Hood. Woolly wanted to remind the audience that Winnie the Pooh was a book and they could interact with it.
Woolly Riverman was really the key factor behind these pictures. He, in a large way, was responsible for the art direction on it too, starting with the book stuff, like having Christopher Robin swinging on the page with all the printing. So you're always aware that this is a book that the kids can read and something that they can get involved in. He had Walt's spirit in him, and Wooly never gave up trying to make things better.
Walt Disney was a big fan of the original illustrations by E.H. Shepard. There were discussions whether to keep the original design or create something new. But Walt decided that they had to make it Disney without moving too far away from Shepard's illustrations.
Well, we all loved the Shepard drawings when we started on the picture and still do. But you can't take something like that is drawn only in certain views. We have to be able to draw the character in every position, every view. So we had to design our own characters. We decided to keep the eyes flexible so that the character could close and open the eyes, they could raise their eyelids, they could move their mouth around and their cheeks a little bit so you get the feeling of an expression, but they couldn't look like this, around or up that way, like Mickey could. We had to do it by turning the head, and actually it was better because it made him look more doll-like.
The designs are beautiful and now recognised around the world. The design of Winnie the Pooh is iconic. When Walt Disney began plans for Winnie the Pooh in 1961, he realised that the audience in Europe was much more familiar than the US audience. So he decided that he was going to release Winnie the Pooh as a short film first to familiarise the US audience with the characters.
We had about 2/3 of what we considered a feature in storyboards. We were in development. Some parts of it were actually in animation, some of the early areas. But we were just really thinking in terms of a total animated feature. And one day we had this major meeting with all the people involved in the Winnie the Pooh project, and Walt said, yeah, what we're going to do is we're going to platform this property. We're not just going to put out a feature, because the American public, particularly the children in America, are not familiar with Winnie the Pooh at all. So actually what he did was he sectioned it into 3 sections. And so we were all kind of like surprised and perturbed about it. We said, well, featurette, why? And he says, you'll see. Once we have people aware of the Winnie the Pooh characters, the next time around it'll be much, much bigger. And it'll become classic. It'll become a masterpiece. You watch and see.
And I think we can all agree that Walt was right. Winnie the Pooh became a pop culture icon across the world. But I'm getting ahead of myself. They decided to put one character in the film for the American audience.
We wanted to have, and Walt wanted to have, one kind of an American character that would also bring in the youngsters in America. And Gopher is a very American animal. We were pleased with him, except that we were very nervous about it, because after all, there are Pooh-ophiles. There are people that really adore Winnie the Pooh, particularly in England, and we didn't want to offend anyone. So Larry Clemens came up with this idea. He said, how about if he pops up out of a gopher hole and he says, I'm not in the book, but I'm at your service. Gopher's the name. I mean, it was just one of those wonderful, spontaneous things. And everybody said, absolutely right, I'm not in the book. Double meaning. Not in the phone book, but he's not in the A.A. Milne book either.
Dash it all, he's gone. After all, he's not in the book, you know.
It is so important to get the right voice actor for the animation. After all, the actor only has their voice to communicate the emotion. The animator takes this voice recording and pushes it for the animation.
Walt always wanted this believable business. He wanted to transport the audience to some make-believe place that they could never go themselves. And that's what the right voice does for you.
Oh, bother.
The perfect voice for Winnie the Pooh was Sterling Holloway. He was already very familiar with Disney. He had provided the voice for Car in Jungle Book and Rockfort in Aristocats. The character developed from the voice. Winnie the Pooh became a popular character. He had the innocence of a child who is still learning about the world.
Winnie the Pooh is very straight. He's like a little child. He's just totally honest and says it just the way it happens, the way children do. They don't have any hidden meanings.
Paul Winchell invented the perfect voice for the role of Tigger. He brought so much life to the character. The voice has been mimicked ever since.
You come in and you look at all the characters on the wall. You try to see whether you can match some kind of a voice quality to the pictures that you see. I was instructed that Tigger was a very exuberant kind of a character, and that at the same time, he was a very humorous kind of a character. So I tried to put together exuberant, which was a guy who was very excited, you know, all the time, and just with his laugh and everything. The thing that I enjoyed most about the character, I really can't put it into words, but I like Tigger. There's a certain quality that I feel that I became identified with in my own mind, so that instead of just reading the lines, I would always ad-lib. I would always throw in something, like I threw in one day that, well, TTFN, ta-ta for now.
Now that the voices were cast, the animation could start and bring these characters to life. Piglet was voiced by John Fielder. Piglet was always scared, but looked to his best friend Pooh for reassurance. For Pooh and Piglet, the animators had to rethink how they would animate the characters. They had the appearance of stuffed toys, with relatively simple buttons for eyes. They had to use hand gestures and more body movements to express the desired emotions.
Piglet's so sympathetic. He's so little, and he's always trying to be such a nice guy and trying to get along, trying not to show that he's scared when he's up in the air like a kite, you know. But he does get panicky, but it's always still a kind of restrained thing.
For the background art, the artists used a similar approach to 101 Dalmatians. This created a great appeal. This style made it appear that they were in the book as the stories were told.
We started using backgrounds on 101 Dalmatians that had painted in flatter areas, but had lines, ink lines, outlining the shapes. I think it was used to advantage on Pooh by just having the outline of the shapes in the background.
The Sherman Brothers wrote the songs for all the shorts and feature film. They had already written the music for Jungle Book, Aristocats and Mary Poppins to great success. The Sherman Brothers always wrote songs that pushed the film forward. They needed a song to show Pooh exercising to build up his appetite.
He wanted to put on weight, not lose weight. Thusly, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. When I up, down and touch the ground, it puts me in the mood. Up, down and touch the ground, in the mood for food.
On February the 4th, 1966, Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree was released. Shortly after, Walt began work on the second short film, Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day. Unfortunately, Walt would not live to see the release of this film.
3 years later, we put out the second Winnie the Pooh, which was Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day.
And it won the Academy Award.
Not only did it win the Academy Award, it was a very, very, very successful featurette, and Winnie the Pooh became like an established Disney character. I mean, he was as fully accepted around the world as any of the previous characters had been. That was, in a sense, a tribute to Walt Disney, too, because it came out after Walt's death, of course, and yet it was something he had personally been very much involved with. So, although he wasn't there to supervise it, Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day was Walt's last great achievement. And now people refer to it as another Walt Disney masterpiece.
To keep in line with what Walt imagined, the first 3 short films were combined to make a Winnie the Pooh feature film. The film was released on March 11th, 1977. The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh holds a unanimous critic approval rating of 100 on Rotten Tomatoes. The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh was first released on VHS in the early 1980s. The 25th anniversary DVD that was released in 2002 had a digital restoration which made the animation burst out the screen in the best quality ever seen. Winnie the Pooh and his friends have become pop culture icons. I don't even know how to start talking about the effect that they've had, but I guess I'll start with the facts. The Winnie the Pooh franchise has seen 6 feature films, including The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, The Tigger Movie, Piglet's Big Movie, Pooh's Heffalump Movie, Winnie the Pooh, and Christopher Robin. There have been 9 direct-to-video films. My favourite being Pooh's Grand Adventure, The Search for Christopher Robin. In this film, Christopher Robin goes to school, but the gang misread his letter and go on an adventure to find him. There have been 4 television series, including Welcome to Pooh Corner, The New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, The Book of Pooh, and most recently, My Friends Tigger and Pooh. There have been 11 video games. Although I use the word video game lightly, most of them are learning games. He also plays a key part in the Kingdom Hearts series. They can be found inside the book 100 Acre Wood. But now it's time to talk about the exciting part, Winnie the Pooh in the Disney parks. Winnie the Pooh and friends are almost megastars in the Disney parks across the world. There have been meet and greet characters of Pooh, Tigger, Piglet, Eeyore, Rabbit and Kango and Roo. A dark ride based on Pooh was opened in Magic Kingdom at Disney World in 1999. It replaced Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, which upset some loyal fans at the time. But the ride has become incredibly popular with the guests. Versions of this ride opened in Disneyland in 2003, Hong Kong Disneyland in 2005, and Shanghai Disneyland in 2016. The merchandise for Winnie the Pooh is extremely lucrative to Disney. Analysts believe that Pooh is worth between $3 billion and $6 billion annually. Yeah, you heard that right, not overall, per year, between $3 billion and $6 billion. This makes Winnie the Pooh the third best-selling franchise in the world, even beating Mickey Mouse himself, Star Wars, Disney Princess, Harry Potter and Marvel. There are even some reports saying it's the second best-selling franchise because the top three switch quite often. Winnie the Pooh is worth this due to the retail sales of merchandise over the years. It has made $76 billion in merchandise so far. When you are in Disneyland, you can see almost any product with Pooh merchandise. This includes books, plush toys, clothing, pins, Mickey ears. In 2003, Disney almost lost the rights to Winnie the Pooh as the rights were coming to an end and they could have returned to the A.A. Milne family. The family could have then sold the rights to another company. Luckily, Disney managed to retain the rights. It bought the rights for $350 million. This is the nation's biggest literary contract ever. It paid the lump sum, so now the rights expire in 2026. There is so much to discuss about Winnie the Pooh, there is no way I could discuss it all in one video. One day, I will create a whole video dedicated to the franchise of Winnie the Pooh, and there is so much from films, TV, parks and merchandise to talk about. The Rescuers is the 23rd Disney animated feature film. It was released on June 22nd, 1977. The Rescuers entered development in 1962, but was shelved due to Walt Disney's dislike of the project's political overtones. During the 1970s, the film was revived again and was planned as a project for the younger animators. We were starting to see a change in the lead animators. Before this time, there had always been Disney's 9 old men. The 9 old men were the incredible animators who were responsible for the golden and silver era of animation. However, they were all reaching retirement age and needed to pass the baton on to a new generation. Out of the 9 old men, only 6 worked on The Rescuers. Woolie Reitherman and John Lansbury were the film's directors. Frank Thomas, Ollie Johnston and Milt Carr were the only members still animating. As I said, this project was originally for the young animators, led by Don Bluth. It was decided that the studio would alternate between full-scale A pictures and smaller, scaled-back B pictures with simpler animation. Meanwhile, the A crew finished work on Robin Hood and were set to begin production on an adaptation of a book titled Scruffy under the direction of Ken Anderson. When Scruffy was shelved, the veteran team changed The Rescuers into a more traditional, full-scale production. The film is about the Rescue Aid Society, an international mouse organisation dedicated to helping abduction victims around the world. Cruella de Vil from 101 Dalmatians was originally considered to be the main villain, but Ollie Johnston stated that it felt wrong to attempt a sequel and the idea was dropped. This is ironic, as it ended up being the first Disney film to receive a sequel. Frank Thomas animated many characters in the film, but mainly worked on the 2 lead characters, Bernard and Bianca. Mice in Disney films before had often been comedic characters, but these characters needed to be treated as lead actors. The acting became more human in order to carry the romance of the adventure. Frank Thomas would often act out scenes himself to get a feel of how the animation should look.
Come to think of it, if I was a pirate, I wouldn't hide anything back there.
Come to think of it, if I was a pirate, I wouldn't hide anything back there.
Ollie Johnston was assigned to many characters. He supervised the animation of the orphan girl Penny and Rufus the old cat. Rufus is clearly based on Ollie, and it makes me laugh every time I see it. Ollie carried a large part of this picture with the quantity of animation he produced at a high level. He ensured that the audience felt sympathy for Penny and wished for her to be adopted. Like Frank, Ollie would also act out his scenes to get a feel of the animation. Ollie acted out a scene to get the feel of Penny walking and show her affection for Rufus.
I had a scene in Rescuers where Penny carries the cat out to go to supper. And she could have just walked out and had the cat follow her, but I wanted to show how much she liked the cat, how affectionate she felt, and how the cat felt about her. So I had her pick the cat up in a way really that practically strangles the cat, but he loves her so much he doesn't want to say anything about it. And she starts walking with him, and he starts to slip, and she has to boost him up. And it's much easier to do a walk like that than it is just a regular walk, where she has something definite she's trying to express, some emotional state.
A pigeon was originally proposed to be the transportation for Bernard and Bianca, but Ollie Johnston remembered a True Life Adventures episode that showed albatrosses and their clumsy takeoff. He thought this bird would be perfect for the character.
And then when he started to take off was where I really had the problems, trying to figure out what to do, because there was so much keen live action there where he's running along and he'd often abort the flight, just run out into the water, and Zoda say, "Yeah, I can do this tomorrow, why bother now?" And that worked pretty good, but I felt, gee, there's still something wrong here. This isn't as funny as it ought to be. And so I thought, this guy ought to be panting. He ought to be having trouble. So we put in this after the first few steps, and that started to liven it up. And I thought another thing that ought to go in there would be that you hear his feet clomping down the top of the building. So we put that in, and then it really became funny.
This was Milt Kahl's last film for the studio, and he wanted his final character to be his best. He was so insistent on perfecting Madame Medusa that he ended up doing almost all the animation for the character himself. Milt later said that he probably had more fun animating her than any other character before. The animation is incredible to watch. You can see the flab in her arms move and create some brilliant poses.
Well, Geraldine Page is she's an absolutely magnificent actress. She has just a marvelous feeling for comedy. See, I saw quite a few of her pictures too, and there's a place in there where he tries to get near. She's on the telephone, and he tries to get near, and she sticks her foot in his chest, to keep him away from the telephone. And I always remembered that. It was an awfully cruel thing to do, and right in character with her.
Milt left the Disney Studios a bit prematurely. He was still in his top form as an animator, but he was outspoken and was very critical on the Disney management since Walt Disney passed away. This led to frustration between Milt and the management. Ever since 101 Dalmatians, animation was done using the Xerox machine. This had only been able to produce black outlines. This had been improved to become a grey tone in order to create a softer looking line. At the end of the production, it marked the last joint effort by veterans Milt Kahl, Ollie Johnston and Frank Thomas. It is also the first Disney film in which Don Bluth was a directing animator. This leads to big changes in the future of Disney animation. Other animators who stepped up during production were Glen Keane and Ron Clements, who would all play an important role in the Disney Renaissance. During the film's initial theatrical run, the film was released as a double feature with the live-action nature film, The Tale of Two Critters. The Rescuers was very successful upon its original theatrical release, earning worldwide gross rentals of $48 million at the box office. During its initial release in France, it outgrossed Star Wars, receiving admissions of 7.2 million. The film also became the highest grossing film in West Germany at the time, with admissions of 9.7 million. On December 16, 1983, The Rescuers was re-released to theatres, accompanied with the new Mickey Mouse featurette, Mickey's Christmas Carol, which marked the character's first theatrical appearance in over 30 years. The Rescuers premiered on VHS and Laserdisc on September 18, 1992 as part of the Walt Disney Classics series. On January 8, 1999, 3 days after the film's second release on home video, the Walt Disney Company announced a recall of about 3.4 million copies of the videotapes. This was because of an image in one of the film's backgrounds. The image is of a topless woman. The image appears in 2 frames during the scenes in which Miss Bianca and Bernard are flying through New York City. The Rescuers home video was reissued on March 23, 1999, with the inappropriate nudity edited out and blocked. The Rescuers was the first Disney animated film to have a sequel. The Rescuers Down Under takes place in the Australian outback and involves Bernard and Bianca trying to rescue a boy named Cody. There have been meet and greet characters of Bernard and Bianca in the Disney parks, although they're quite rare to see now. The Fox and the Hound is the 24th Disney animated feature film. It was based on the novel of the same name. Like many Disney adaptations, the book was much darker than the Disney film released. It was the first Disney film to be released in the 80s, and we were beginning to see the baton passed down from the legendary animators of the past to the new upcoming animators.
All the artists that were doing Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin and Mermaid and Rescuers Down Under and the new pictures, this is really our start. This is the picture that we started to take off from. It was quite an interesting time because when it started, it did start out with Woolie Reitherman and Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston, which are all some of Disney's 9 old men. They started off the picture and did some of the animation, set some of the characters, got it going, and then they had to pass off the whole picture onto brand new animators that had only been at the studio for a few years.
Walt Disney Productions first obtained the film rights to the novel in 1967, although actual development would not happen until 1977. The film marked the last involvement of the remaining members of Disney's 9 old men, which included Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston.
Frank Thomas, Ollie Johnston, Eric Larson were the old guys saying, you guys will do it. You know, we have all the confidence in the world to it. Someday you're going to do greater things than us. And I was shaking in my boots.
Frank and Ollie had been working with Disney since the first Disney feature film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. They had been working with the company for over 30 years at this point. They wanted to pass on their knowledge to the new, young and upcoming animators.
I remember standing behind Ollie as he was going over my drawings and just kind of staring at the top of his head and thinking, this is Ollie Johnston going over my drawings. It was quite an interesting time.
Frank and Ollie knew that they would retire halfway into the production of this film, so they wanted to make every second count. Frank and Ollie would stay with Disney after their retirement to write The Illusion of Life, and this became the Bible of learning animation, and I've studied every page of this book.
The old animators tried to pass on what knowledge they could to the younger fellows who were coming in, or who had been there for some time but had not had a chance to move on up. And they were very eager, of course, to learn their skills.
It was the first film for many animators who would go on to become directors in the future, including Tim Burton, Brad Bird, John Lasseter and Chris Buck. In spring 1977, development began on the project after Wolfgang Reitherman had read the original novel and decided it would make a good feature animation. The title was initially The Fox and the Hounds, but the filmmakers dropped the plural as the story began to focus more and more on the 2 lead characters, Todd and Copper. Woolie Reitherman was the film's original director, along with Art Stevens as the co-director. However, arguments would begin between the 2 directors and co-producer Ron Miller. Ron Miller was the son-in-law of Walt Disney and was the current president of the Walt Disney Company at the time. The 2 directors would argue over key sections of the film, with Ron Miller supporting the younger Art Stevens. During the production, Woolie Reitherman decided to step down as the director. This would end a long legacy of Reitherman directing Disney films. He had led the animation team after Walt Disney's death, and had directed the last 6 Disney movies. These were The Sword and the Stone, The Jungle Book, The Aristocats, Robin Hood, Winnie the Pooh, and The Rescuers. Unfortunately, on May 22nd, 1985, Reitherman died in a car accident, aged 75. He will always be remembered as the person who kept animation alive after Walt. Frank Thomas animated scenes of Todd and Copper when they were younger. Frank and Ollie always animated great relationships between characters in their movies. That's what made their animation so special. They wanted to pass on this knowledge to the new animators as much as the fundamentals of animation.
Besides just the mechanics of animating, we tried to get them interested in what we were interested in their own way, of course, and that is in developing personality and getting what Walt always asked us to do, which was to get the relationship between characters.
A lot of new animators would go on to play a big part in the future of animation. These animators were Randy Cartwright, John Musker, Ron Clements, Glen Keane, Tim Burton, Brad Bird, Henry Selick, Chris Buck, Mike Gabriel, and Mark Dindal. A lot of these animators had gone through the in-house animation training program and would play an important role in the Disney Renaissance in the 1980s and the 1990s. Ron Clements and John Musker were 2 of these animators who would go on to have a huge future directing at Disney. They would go on to direct The Great Mouse Detective, The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Hercules, Treasure Planet, Princess and the Frog, and Moana.
We still had some of the older animators on that, Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston, two of the 9 old men who had gone all the way back to Snow White. They kind of finished their animation careers on The Fox and the Hound.
We knew when we started that we were going to leave, retire, before we even reached the middle of the picture. So we confined most of our effort to the story work and the relationship with the characters.
Ron Clements would animate scenes with Big Mama. He did some great work at bringing this owl to life. He took inspiration from the voice actress who gave him incredible material to work with. His future directing partner, John Musker, started as an animator on this film. He would go on to the story side of animated features. As I mentioned, he would go on to craft some incredible stories with Clements.
I was an animator on Fox and Hound. I later moved into story and direction. I think on the later films that we worked on, though, I still did try and apply the sort of lessons that people like Frank and Ollie were trying to drum into us in terms of the importance of character.
I worked on Big Mama, and I watched Pearl Bailey a lot during recording sessions and tried to kind of incorporate aspects of kind of how an owl moves and combine that with how Pearl Bailey would move and trying to fuse those together.
One huge animator, who was one of the new animators at the time, was Glen Keane. Glen Keane would go on to be the directing animator of Ariel, Beast, Pocahontas, Tarzan, and Captain Long John Silver. Glen Keane was aware that his time with Frank and Ollie would be limited, and he wanted to make the most of it.
The passing of the baton was always on my mind. I knew that I was only going to have a short time with those guys there in that hallway where I could go and talk with them.
Ollie really enjoyed developing the relationships as he did with previous films. He especially liked the relationship between Copper and Chief.
Oh, I like the relationship between Copper and Chief, where Chief felt this young kid was gradually moving in on him, and eventually he has to sit in the back seat. So true to life, and it's the young guy coming up and replacing the older one.
They're a group who were not happy with the direction of Disney. This group was led by Don Bluth. And on Don Bluth's 42nd birthday, September the 13th, 1979, Bluth, along with Gary Goldman and John Pomeroy, entered Ron Miller's office, and they turned in their resignations. Soon after, 11 more animators would also turn in their resignations. Don Bluth had convinced all of these animators to leave Disney and set up their own animation company. They would go on to create The Secret of Nymph and The Land Before Time. Although Bluth and his team had animated a substantial amount of the scenes in The Fox and the Hound, they asked not to receive screen credit. Ron Miller ordered all of the resigning animators off the studio lot by the noon of that same day. He would push the release back 6 months from Christmas 1980 to the summer of 1981. New animators were hired and promoted to fill the ranks. To compensate for the lack of experience of the new animators, much of the quality control would rely upon veteran assistant animators. Glen Keane would animate the incredible sequence of Todd fighting the bear.
What I really enjoyed animating there was when Todd the Fox went back to save Copper, his friend, against the worst possible odds, this huge bear that established as a monster, and that this fox would go against all odds to do the impossible thing. Now, that really captured my heart, and that's what excited me.
This bear has so much weight and strength, which is so difficult to show with just pencil drawings. The fur of the bear is overlapping and moving as the bear moves. You can see a lot of how this animation would influence some of his choices when he became the supervising animator on The Beast. I can see a lot of The Beast from this animation. There were some strong issues tackled in the film. Todd and Copper start as friends at the beginning of the movie, and then are forced to separate.
It is a strong message, and just the strong underlying dramatic thing of two friends who are separated by circumstances and by society in a way, and it makes a statement about racial prejudice, I think, and trying to overcome that.
Well, there were actually a lot of strong thematic elements underneath Fox and the Hound, things that had to do with bigotry and with people being sort of stereotyped and forced into certain roles, particularly with the Fox and the Hound, who start out as friends and then find out that according to the rules they're supposed to be enemies, and they have to deal with that and finally come to terms with that.
4 years after the production started, after a rocky production, the film was finally finished. The Fox and the Hound was released to theatres on July the 10th, 1981. The film was a financial success, and earned $39.9 million in the United States. However, it initially received mixed feedback from critics who praised the animation and the voice acting of the film, but believed the film was not groundbreaking enough. It was re-released to theatres on March 25th, 1988. It was the final Disney film to have all the credits in the title sequence, which is a shame as I love the title sequences showing the animators of the film at the beginning. A direct-to-video sequel, The Fox and the Hound 2, was released on December 12, 2006. I've never seen it, so I have no comments. It's probably awful. But it might not be. The Fox and the Hound does not have any attractions or meetable characters in the Disney parks. However, there is still lots of merchandise available. This is quite a sad moment, as this is the last time in the series of videos that I'll get to talk about Frank and Ollie in depth. From Snow White all the way up to Fox and the Hound, Frank and Ollie have had incredible input on the Disney films. Frank and Ollie would still be at the studio, but they have now turned their attention into writing books to preserve the art of animation. Thank you for everything, guys. The Black Cauldron was based on a book series written by Lloyd Alexander. Disney acquired the rights to the books in 1973, with production beginning in 1980. It was Ollie Johnston and Frank Thomas, two of Disney's 9 old men, that convinced the studio to produce the movie. They believed if it was done properly, it might have been as good as Snow White. This was a new era in Disney. The Disney company almost had a corporate takeover. This led to Ron Miller, the current president of the company, and Walt Disney's son-in-law, stepping down from his role. Eisner hired Jeffrey Katzenberg as head of the film division, but he proved to be a controversial figure. He often forced the animators to work long hours and overtime to complete the films. The original book series had over 30 characters, so several story artists and animators worked on the development of the story, deciding which sections of the book should be used for their version. The first director attached to the project was animator John Musker, who would go on to become a legendary Disney director. John Musker and his future directing partner, Ron Clements, left the project citing creative differences and began development on The Great Mouse Detective, which would start their incredible career directing Disney films. When production on The Fox and the Hound had wrapped, animation directors Art Stevens, Richard Rich and Ted Berman became involved in The Black Cauldron. Joe Hale, who was a long-time layout artist at the Disney Studios, was brought on to serve as the producer. Hale tossed out character artwork submitted by Tim Burton. This upset the young animator and led him to quit Disney. There was a test screening for the film just before it was about to be released in 1984. The film proved to be too intense and disturbing for the majority of children in the audience, most of whom ran out of the theatre in terror before it was even finished. The newly appointed Jeffrey Katzenberg ordered scenes to be cut. Animation films are generally edited in the storyboard stages, so the producer Joe Hale objected to Katzenberg's demands. Katzenberg responded to this by having the film brought to him and started to re-edit the film himself. Hale informed CEO Michael Eisner of what Katzenberg was doing. Michael Eisner got on the phone to Katzenberg and convinced him to stop. Though Katzenberg did what Eisner insisted, Katzenberg requested that the film be modified and delayed. He wanted to delay the film from Christmas 1984 to 1985 so the film could be reworked. The film was ultimately cut by 12 minutes, with existing scenes rewritten and reanimated for continuity. The Black Cauldron is notable for being Disney's first animated feature film to use computer-generated imagery. I mean, by a technicality, because it was released first. The first time it was done was on The Great Mouse Detective. Both films were in production at the same time. When producer Joe Hale saw what was being done, the possibilities made him excited, and he made the crew from The Great Mouse Detective create some computer animation for his own film. They used computer animation for bubbles, a boat, a floating orb of light, and the cauldron itself. For other effects, animator Don Paul used live action footage of dry ice mists to create the steam and smoke coming out of the cauldron. Fun extra fact, the smoke during the transformation of the beast is the real smoke originally used in the Black Cauldron. The budget was officially released at $25 million. However, the film's production manager Don Henn said in his documentary Waking Sleeping Beauty that it cost $44 million to produce. If you haven't seen this documentary, go check it out because it's fascinating and you can watch it on Disney+. The film grossed $21.3 million domestically. It resulted in a loss for Walt Disney Studios and put the future of animation in jeopardy. It even received the nickname the film that almost killed Disney. It was not distributed as a home video release for more than a decade after its theatrical run after its disappointing performance. The film was the last Disney animated film to be completed at the original animation building of the Walt Disney Studios in Burbank, California. The animation department was moved to the Airway facility in December 1984. The Great Mouse Detective is the 26th Disney animated feature film. It was released in 1986 and received positive reviews. The film is based on a series of books by Eve Titus called Basil of Baker Street. It is heavily influenced by Sherlock Holmes, and the lead character Basil emulates the detective throughout the books. The idea of doing an animated film about Sherlock Holmes with animals was first discussed during the production of The Rescuers. Veteran layout artist Joe Hale is credited with suggesting to adapt the children's book series Basil of Baker Street. But the project fell into development limbo because of the similarities to The Rescuers. There was a change in management going on behind the scenes. Ron Miller, who was Walt Disney's son-in-law and president of the company, had resigned. Michael Eisner became the new CEO, and Jeffrey Katzenberg became the new chairman of the film division. The Disney company changed from a family business into Hollywood. Eisner and Katzenberg watched a story reel screening of Basil of Baker Street. They were not too sure what they were watching, as they weren't used to stories being presented in this method. This was a method that dated back to Walt Disney, with Walt acting out the entire story with storyboards. Eisner and Katzenberg complained about the slow pacing of the story and ordered for rewrites before the animation would commence. Michael Eisner cut the production budget from $24 million to just $10 million. He moved the release date up to July 1986, giving the production team just 1 year to complete the film. Originally, the design for Ratigan was thin, weaselly and rat-like. Glen Keane said that when the voice actor, Vincent Price, was cast, he redesigned the character to have a new attitude. Glen Keane decided to base the stature of Ratigan on the previous Disney president Ron Miller, who was a 6'6" former football player. Glen was looking through photographs of railroad men in London in the 1800s. And there was this one guy smoking a cigar who had a top hat on and was the perfect inspiration for Glen Keane's new design. A new team of animators were coming up through the ranks and would become the base of the Renaissance era. These included Mark Henn for Basil, Rob Menkoff for Olivia, Andreas Deja for Queen Mastoria, and Mike Gabriel for Toby and Felicia. This was one of the first Disney films to use CGI for a sequence. This was used for the finale sequence in Big Ben. Animators spent months designing the interior of Big Ben, with each gear produced as wireframe graphics on a computer. This was then printed out and traced onto animation cells. This scene was 2 minutes, which made it the first Disney film to extensively use computer animation, a factor that Disney used to promote the film during the marketing. The film was the last work to feature Eric Larson as animation consultant before his retirement. Larson was the last of Disney's 9 old men to work on a Disney film, the group that had defined much of Disney's success in the films. The character of Dr. Dawson was modelled on Larson as a tribute. Peter Snyder was hired as the first president of Walt Disney Feature Animation, and this sometimes created some friction between him and the animators. There was a film released in 1985 called Young Sherlock Holmes, which did not do well in the box office. The heads of Disney decided to rename Basil of Baker Street into The Great Mouse Detective, feeling the name Basil was too English. The retitling of the film was very unpopular with the filmmakers, so much that the animators wrote a joke memo that was sent around the office. The memo was made to look like it was sent by studio executive Peter Snyder, and this was a joke at his expense. And to put it lightly, he was not happy with this. During its release, the film grossed around $50 million worldwide against a budget of just $14 million. This was an incredible success after the failure of the previous film, The Black Cauldron. This gave the management confidence in the animation department that this was something that was desperately needed. This set the stage for the Disney Renaissance. Oliver and Company is the 27th Disney animated feature film. Oliver was released in 1988 and is one of the few Disney films that is set in the year it was released in. The film is based on Charles Dickens' classic novel Oliver Twist. Michael Eisner was now the CEO, and Jeffrey Katzenberg was the president of the film division. Jeffrey Katzenberg was put in charge of revitalising the animated feature films after the recent films were not as successful as the early Disney movies. Katzenberg had already made his mark on the 2 films that were in development at the time, which were The Black Cauldron and The Great Mouse Detective. When The Great Mouse Detective was released, it had good reviews and made the company money, but there was another animation studio in town. The next film would be the first animated film to be greenlit and produced from start to finish by Eisner and Katzenberg, so they wanted to make their mark. After the release of The Black Cauldron in 1985, Eisner and Katzenberg invited the employees to pitch potential ideas for upcoming animated features. This was called The Gong Show. Anyone could pitch for The Gong Show. This became the place for artists to propose their ideas in hopes of it becoming a film. One thing that helped spark The Gong Show was the fact that Pinocchio was released on the brand new medium called VHS. Remember when that was a thing? Pinocchio was the first classic film to release and made a huge amount of money for Disney. This enticed them to have more content to release on VHS. Ron Clements and John Musker pitched The Little Mermaid and Treasure Island in Space, two films they would go on to make, although Treasure Island in Space took a long time to convince Disney to make. Story artist Pete Young suggested Oliver Twist with dogs. Katzenberg had previously planned on producing a live-action adaptation of the musical Oliver when he was at Paramount, and he liked the idea and approved the pitch. The working title of the film was Oliver and the Dodger. Peter Snyder was hired to serve under Jeffrey Katzenberg. Snyder was to focus just on the animation department. He made his mark quickly by firing one of the directors that was already working on Oliver and Company. The times of Disney being a small family-owned business were over now. There was now a corporate feel throughout Disney. It was cutthroat, and story ideas and drawings were often completed lots of times until they were perfect. Disney was under a spotlight constantly from the news. Many journalists wondered if Michael Eisner could ever save Disney or if it was doomed to fail. Was the magic of the golden era truly gone? Many journalists questioned why Disney continued to produce animated films. They are very expensive to produce, with 24 drawings per second, and the time spent to produce each film racked up the cost. I love that Michael Eisner knew how important it was to make animated films. There needed to be new animation films to put new products in Disneyland and Disney World to keep it fresh. He knew that without them, the Disneyland becomes nothing more than a museum looking at the past rather than pushing it into the future. There was another film in production at the time, and this film was a huge success. This success created a new interest in animation from the audience. And this film was Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and this changed the landscape for animation. Richard Williams, one of my favourite animators of all time because of his influence on the industry, was in charge of the animation of this film. He managed to get talented animators from all over the world to work on this film, and many of these animators went on to join Disney Animation after. The animators continued to work on Oliver and Company. Throughout 2.5 years of production, 6 supervising animators and a team of over 300 artists worked on the film. The film had competition when it was released. It was released on the same weekend as Don Bluth's The Land Before Time. Don Bluth's film debuted at number 1, grossing $7.5 million. Oliver and Company opened at 4th, grossing $4 million. But something interesting happened. Audiences continued to go and see Oliver and Company. The box office slowly trickled up. Disney's film grossed $53 million and Land Before Time grossed $46 million. This made Oliver and Company the highest grossing animated film in its initial run. Its success prompted Disney's Senior Vice President of Animation, Peter Snyder, to announce the company's plans to release animated features annually. This is what led up to Disney's Renaissance era. A boom period that included Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Lion King and many more. I cannot wait to share with you guys facts about all of these films. Thank you for watching, guys. If you're one of the few people that stayed around to the very end, comment below. Frank and Ollie are the greatest, so I know you're one of the ones that stuck around for the whole video. If you enjoyed, please go watch some of my other 100 facts about Disney videos.